stripping out, then you've got to use a lot of pressure. Otherwise it won't work, and it won't work. So there's one of the places where you need to use sometimes a lot of pressure. Some facial sleeves and mine were quite screwed up because I walked badly for a few years on two toes that I couldn't feel. So you're walking like this and screwing all your feet up. And when I had to strip all my fascias out, and Chris would do it for me as well, it was hard work. And so there's things where I need to go deep, and I like going deep on people because I want to get deep into the treatment. So there's a place for that, but there's also a place for being very, very light. And over the last few months I've had an incident where I had to work on somebody very, very lightly. That much pressure was too much, but needed things to be done. And there was one occasion where she had a locked first rib because she was flushing the toilet behind her to keep her dignity from her son because she was invalid to that degree. And she would flush the toilet behind her. And one day we noticed the hand was getting all edema. And she had edema in her legs, which we were controlling. The edema in the hand was like, well, where's that coming from? And then it was noticed that she was doing this on the toilet behind her. Still flexible enough to do it. And I said, want that check-in? So the doctor came and he said, oh yes, it's coming from there, it's coming from there. And went, shut the door. Oh well, that was a good clue. Thanks, Doc. Fixed that easily, but no pressure. Well, it's not easy to put a first rib back in with no pressure. So I had to go to these positional dynamics and go, how do I do this with no pressure? And achieved it. So that sort of completed the whole spectrum of the scale you want to be at. One tool, different pressures, different vectors, depending on where you want to be. So that's that part in a nutshell. Any questions?
Obviously that's what you're doing with all the horses as well, then, so you're making a much more bigger global, because obviously with the horses quite sensory feedback.
That's right. When I start doing horses, you go to a horse and you look at the standard way that people are doing things. And the first horse I ever went to was a racehorse that had what you call kissing spines. So you imagine these are the spinous processes, and the lower back of the horse had sunk, and so the spines touch each other, so they call it kissing spines, the spinous process. And what they do is they do a routine operation. I think it's about £5,000. It could be 15. It could have been even 15. And this client was going to Christopher and said, oh, we've got this horse, and we did it, and you don't know something about horses, so I ended up going to have a look at this one horse this one Saturday to see if we could solve this problem. So I came down its back and I said, the vet's done that, right? The horse masseur's done that, the horse osteopath have done that. Well, they haven't done this. They haven't joined the top to the bottom. The occiput and the sacrum aren't working properly, and that's why you're losing the spring here and it's causing this to do this. So can that be fixed? I said, yeah, you can fix that. So spent about 20 minutes on this horse. Start spinning about. The spine went up and down like a spring mattress, wouldn't move before. Horse started to articulate, trained, and away we went. While you're here, can you look at that one? I did 6 that morning, and then I did 12 every day, every Saturday for 18 months. Couldn't get away from the place. But it got me to do horses. And what was good about that is, if you want to do a visceral on a horse, there's the spine, and there's the belly. And you go, what are we going to feel in the middle of this? And eventually you start to feel the stensification. It's like, wow. And then you get hold of a horse's leg, and it's like, it's a big heavy thing, unless you want to move it around. You go into a horse's psoas, you go into its cloacals. So I learnt lots from there as well. But thanks for that, Dave, because that was a really big part of the learning curve. Which brings us back to here. So, any other questions? Gear train? What's a gear train?
I understand from looking at it, but the thing that you said for me is like you have that there's no loss of potential.
That's the biggest thing there.
Yeah.
So in the body, if you imagine the foot being a gear train, and it transfers to the knee, and it transfers to the pelvis, and it comes through the spine, and it comes right up the spine, and it goes out to the limb, and each time it's losing 5% at every joint. It's invalid by the time it gets to your hand. So that's no use, and it doesn't lose any. And then what you've got also with a gear train is, if you had a tight nut on a car, and you've got your tyre lever, if it was really tight, if a gorilla's put it on, you increase the length of the lever, and so that increases the torque of the gear train. So again, we can adjust it with long levers, and I don't like to use the word levers, but our bones, if we understand levers, then it's easy to describe, like a long lever or a leverage or a crowbar type effect. So the longer the lever, the farther away from the centre of axis, the greater the motion. So there's the nut. So the arm's way out there, it will go like that, so that's going to become the second hand, because it's way out there on the face of the clock, and it'll torque there, and it'll turn this nut. So that's how gear trains work, and that's how crowbars and levers work. But the biggest thing, as you point out there, Derek, is it loses no potential at all, which is a very big part of the story. So this is probably the best visual that we can get, because there's gear trains all around the body. The biggest one that we're going to talk about is the sacroiliac joint with the iliac bones. Because what's unique about the human body is that we've got this diarthrodial joint, and the hip bones move in reciprocal opposite directions, with the sacrum doing exactly the opposite. Now with a horse or a dog, it's carried with it. It's just tip to one side, tip to the other side, which still produces an angular torque in the lumbar spine, but with the upright bipedal, very, very different. So as the iliac bone is going forward on this side in the walking phase, the opposite one is going back over, and you've got your iliolumbar ligaments coming off the fifth and fourth lumbars, coming to the iliac bone. So if this iliac bone goes forward in motion, and this iliac bone goes backward in motion, the transverse processes that have the iliolumbar ligaments and muscles on, it's pulled forward by the forward motion ilium and pulled backward by the opposite, and so it turns the fifth lumbar into the rotation of the direction of the ilium. You understand that? Because that's joined to that, if that moves forward, that's pulled on that side, that iliac bone is going back over, so that's pulled backwards, so that rotates the fifth lumbar in a rotation in the direction of the forward moving ilium and corresponding backward. The sacrum underneath is doing exactly, reciprocally, the opposite. So the fifth lumbar is rotating that way, the iliac bone is going forward, the iliac bone on the opposite side is going backwards, and the sacrum is going in the total opposite of that, those directions. Now that's possible because we've got a diarthrodial joint. If we didn't have it, we'd be carried with it, the same as the dog, and we'd have the sort of waddle, and for our lumbar spine we'd need to undulate to get power, but we don't. Just bring the bag. Nobody scared of spiders, are they? That's your lesion pattern. So once on a talk with Stephen Levin, he had one of these. You probably all seen these magic things when you were a kid. That's all it does, but it's quite unique. So what you've got is blocks of wood. They're independent, but they're a chain, they're a kinematic chain that's joined together with those struts. So now they're tension coupled, but allow movement. So if we put one of those in the middle, and we look at that as being the sacrum, and this as being the iliac bone, the iliolumbar ligament, which is around the base of S2, so there's your sacrum, S1, S2, that's where the iliolumbar ligament would be, and that attaches to the ilium, and it allows the sacrum to move forward and back in these reciprocal opposite movements to the iliac bone, almost like a click-clack. So basically, it's that. And he said, that's the action of the sacrum. And at first when I saw it, I was like, I don't quite get that. This tensegrity stuff was a bit like physics. It was like a new subject to me. But now I get it. And so we're dependent on the stability of the sacrum in between the two sacroiliac joints to be able to click-clack like that while we're walking, to allow the fifth lumbar to follow the iliac bone to produce a side bend on the 5 lumbars as it comes up to D12 junction point. So this is your last rib with the diaphragm coming off of it. And these 5 lumbars, as the rotation of the 5th lumbar and the 4th lumbar, and then the 3rd lumbar less, the 2nd lumbar less, and the 1st lumbar less. So that moves like that. But because you've got an existing curve in your lordosis, the law of the flexible rod states that you can't put a side bend on a curve without producing rotation. So the fact that we've got a structure that maintains the curve, we've got a structure that imbalances the stability of this joint here from horizontal, so it tips it into distortion, allows side bend to take place, and the facets in between the joints are heavily invested with proprioceptors, that again monitoring all this, and the multifidus muscles, which are on either side of our spine. When I talked about the fish, they have a muscle on one side and a muscle on the other. So all I can do is bend one side of its spine, then the other, to produce undulation, which is fine in water. We have multifidus, multi meaning many, obviously, fidus meaning feather-like, tiny, tiny, tiny muscles, all between there. And what they do is, when we get a pulse return from the foot, the spine stiffens the lordosis by making these muscles stiffen to limit side bend, because we don't want to go into undulation. It's a lesser form of locomotion.
So if you have the fuse back, someone fuses it, does it move further up and cause for problems, or does it just create a wobble? Bit of both.
A bit of both. It's not going to be as effective as it was. And that is one of the problems with, especially fusions. If you put the 3 and 4 together, 2 and 5 will move a bit more in compensation, and eventually get their own problems. But in locomotive terms, that all needs to be in that talk. The other thing I talked about was 4-bar mechanism. So if this was a train, and this was one of the train wheels, and this was the next one, and I put a bar from there to there, and another bar from there to there, when this wheel turns, it wouldn't make it turn the other way. It would turn it the same way as that one. So the 4-bar mechanism is working the locomotion. And our body also works in a 4-bar mechanism type of movement as well. So when you look at a Tyrannosaurus rex, most pictures of T-Rexes make them look as if they bent over 2 little arms. But they found anthropologically they weren't like that at all. They were stood up, and the arms were up here, or whatever they needed those little arms for. And the way it walked, because they found evidence in the mud, archaeology, is that it used to put its foot down, straight, flat, like a chicken. It runs exactly like a chicken. So a chicken is an ancient one of them. And it puts its foot down. So what it does, it picks it up, and the spine undulates, and it moves forward a bit and puts it back down again. And what they found is, in the mud samples, that there was no heel strike and there was no toe off. And so they've worked it out now that it has to have been walking in a 4-bar mechanism through the hips. So the hip, the femur's pumping up and down, but the iliac bone rotates around it and produces the 4-bar mechanism, just like the side of a train. So if you can imagine, that's how it's walking.
So there's no twist on the foot?
Sorry?
No twist on
No
the
twist
foot?
on the foot, it's just up and down, up and down. Hasn't got the 3 arches we've got. In fact, what was strange is someone put on the internet one day that they were trying to solve a problem. They looked at these archaeological samples, put plastic casts and everything, and realised no heel strike, no toe off. How did they walk? And they put a help out into the universe, and Stephen Levin saw the help, and he said, I know the answer to that. So this person said, brilliant, will you come and show me? So he said, I went to the person's laboratory, and there was all these devices that could measure this, that could measure that, that could measure everything. And he proved, tensegrally, that it had to have been a 4-bar mechanism, that's how it worked. And the woman said, right, that's fine. He said, are you going to use that research? He said, no, she couldn't accept it. But he proved it with all the science. And so tensegrity is still in its infancy as far as science goes. But once you understand that kind of locomotion, a man called Fred Illy, who dissected bodies in such a way to find this ligament, it's actually named after him, it's called the ligament of Illy, that goes from S2 to the side of the ilium. He found that in people who had no legs at all, could actually be taught to walk on the ischial tuberosities. And if you put the pulse return through the ischial tuberosity, it would make the spine and the thorax turn in opposite directions. And if you look on the internet, on his site, you'll see people walking as if they were upright bipedal on the ischial tuberosities, because it can still produce this 4-bar mechanism of rotation on the thorax and the pelvis. So that then becomes the way of moving. So that explains that. And this muscle, this one here, you use your own imagination. I'm describing what I'm describing. If your mind takes you somewhere else, it's got nothing to do with me. But I always thought it when I bought it. Why would I want to buy this model? But if you imagine this has been a tensegril mast, the same as this is, and you imagine this has been the 5 lumbars, and so these all being the multifidus muscles, that when you get a pulse return from your foot, and that's just, it doesn't have to be much, your foot's touching the floor, it's therefore in contact with an interface, that sends a signal up that rather both feet together, one's forward, different weight bearing, different gradients, different contours, all of that's information that's incoming. And it's important to understand incoming information, because what we're going to do over the next 2 days is to teach our fingers to be incomers, not outgoers. And then you realise how much you use them as outgoers most of the time, and you go, if I just use to be an ingoer, it wouldn't be able to do X. And I'm going to teach you that that's possible also. So if we put a stiffening on the multifidus muscles, so that's the lumbars, they would stiffen. Now as they stiffen, they stop the side bend, rotate the side bend on the lumbars, which stops the undulation, but because it's got a curve, it rotates, and that rotary torque is the turbine that drives us. Does that make sense? Well, I know this is, I'm showing you stuff that it's took me a long time to sort of get together and understand, and you go, that doesn't make much sense. So the best thing is to discuss it, extrapolate it out a little bit and go, I get that, or accept it and we move along. And then when you buy me the whiskey tonight, you'll go, explain that again, and you'll have to come on again. That's the way things go. So basically what we're looking at is some underlying scientific principles that can be the servant of nature. That's what Tony said. He said, science has to be the servant of nature, not the master. And it's also in the book, Energy Medicine by Ushman. Brilliant book. I got it out yesterday. I read it about 15 years ago, wrote all my notes on it, put it away, and I was looking for one reference from Ushman. And the reference I was looking for was that he found that when tissue, fascia especially, is distorted, it dehydrates. And when it dehydrates, it's no longer capable of mechanotransduction, which changes a mechanical stimuli into a chemical stimuli. And that's how the body works on those neurotransmitters and those messages. So when you've got dehydrated tissue, you've got bound water, bulk water instead of bound water instead of bulk water. And electrical messages won't pass through it. And then you're looking at the nervous system, you look at the meridian circuits, they're not going to work. The Golgi cells in the muscles are not going to give the right response. So dehydrated tissue is a no-no. That's what we're after not having. I've lost my last word. Dehydrated tissue, what was that? Transduction. Yeah, thanks. Mechanotransduction. So when you press on tissue, what we do is produce mechanotransduction, which changes basically the hydration of tissue is the biggest thing that you're changing. And when you're looking at fascia, fascia wraps around all of the structures in the body. So it separates if you're coming from meridian therapy, the upper burner from the middle burner from the lower burner, it separates the organs, it separates the lungs, it separates the lungs from the lower organs so that we don't get infections going to different parts. It actually separates the lungs, so we've got compartments in there, so you might get pneumonia in one part but it doesn't travel to the other. We've got a massive diaphragm, which is basically the liver pushing through it. We've got the liver underneath there, the stomach underneath there, but they're all in this peritoneal sac. You've got the kidneys in the retroperitoneal sac. You've got the bottom layer here, which is another diaphragm. Things have to pass through. So that fascia is all binding all of that and allowing certain structures to pass through, just like the wires pass through conduits to the lights. And they're passing through the hips and through the feet and through and in between the muscles. So when you're looking at meridian circuits, what you're looking at is the pathways along the facial lines in between muscles. So, right. When you're looking at peripheral nerves, they have to travel in exactly the same channels. So they're there as well. When you look at the arteries and the veins, they're there as well. When you look at the lymphatics, they're there as well. So it's the only route out. And in the body, you've got all sorts of different pressures. I mean, the liver is kept up in this cavity with a barometric pressure of minus 20. So it's sucked up there. And you've got all sorts of pressures in the body. But what happens with pressures is you'll always go from high pressure to low pressure. So if there's a low pressure somewhere, the high pressure will push it out. So if you get a blister, it'll push it out. If you get a cut, it'll pump it out. And so in the body, it's moving like that all the time, up and down, changing pressures. Once those circuits close up, when those channels close up, you can't change those pressures. So you get builds up of the pressures, you get deficiencies of pressures. You get movement that's not fully natural, so you start to get pressure on nerves, so you get peripheral nerve interference. You're going to press on energy channels, so you get energy channel interference. It can be either coming from the organ or remote. And so the whole thing, the one common denominator, is pressing on the tissue to open those facial channels. It's as simple as that. If you can open those channels up, you're achieving all of those. If you never understood acupuncture, if you never understood a peripheral nerve, but that was your technique, you would inadvertently get those results without knowledge. But it's much better to have the knowledge, be able to cross-correlate it and go, I opened this up, and now there's no longer a trapped nerve there, but liver 2 works well, and I've got this gate back, and that's happened over here. If you don't know that, it doesn't matter. But as you do start to look at that, so if I fix a gate, I've got someone's gate, so at Amma level, I'll show you how to fix a gate. At a different level, I'll say, don't do that anymore, do this. At another level, I say, don't even do that, do this. And you go, actually, this is what it's responsible for. And you can energetically change a gate, or you can mechanically change a gate by understanding all those different levels. And that's what the levels give us, that depth of knowledge. For the ones that don't fix that way, then you've got to fix it this way. That's where all of this comes together. So that was that, heterokinetic, 4-bar mechanism, And the spider is my interpretation of a lesion. So when we look at the amplicate level of the body, then if all of this fascia is pulling correctly, and that's my 6-pack, and all nice and symmetrical, but I could be like that. And what we've got to be able to do is go into there and feel, not what the surface is doing, because of Hilton's law, it doesn't matter how deep the lesion is, when we're on the surface, this could be twisting that. And so we need to be able to feel deep, 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 deep down. So if you think of going down to someone's duodenum, for instance, viscerally, it's about 8 inches down from this surface area. So you go, oh, and I'm just going to adjust someone's duodenum. Good luck with that. If you haven't got enough tension here, you're not going to change that. So again, it's how do we load these things in such a way that the signals go where we want, and that's where the vectoring comes. Because what you've got with a vector is, you've got a vector is a line of tension. If you've got 2 lines of tension, where they meet is called a node. And if you've got several of those, that's called an eigenvector. So if you get one of those cocktail oranges and you stick all those cocktail sticks in, if they could all meet at the centre, that would be the central node. And so if you imagine that as being the central mass of the body, that central node sitting over the centre of gravity, and as we move, it's always in balance, 3-dimensionally and on 3 levels. And that's what's unique about Atsumi's art, is that in karate you don't do anything on the floor, in judo you do everything on the floor, in jiu-jitsu you grab the person, you don't strike, you don't punch, in boxing you put gloves on. There's all these different arts that segment the way we use our body in combat. And Atsumi's art has 36 methods of escape. So front, back, diagonal, over there, over there, over there. And all the sort of forms also indicate movement in all directions, and that's how we operate. We've got to be able to move in that way. So I say to some people, how many times did you walk backwards today? There's no need, I can turn around. Okay? And they do. And there's lots of other movements that we don't make. These movements make us make sense. Any questions there? All okay with it? Right. A little bit of a demonstration.